questions from the audience. This is really exciting because there was so many pieces of paper flying in the audience. And Paul has got our very first question lined up.
Do you need the laws of quantum physics for universes to be created? And if so, where did the laws of quantum physics come from?
Well, okay, that's a good and complex question, which is obviously I can't answer in its entirety. First of all, the point is I never claim I know how to create universes exactly. I wish it'd be nice to be able to know how to do that. What I can do is argue from the basis of what we know what's plausible and what's possible. Now, it is true that a quantum theory of gravity would allow, based on everything we know, for universes, namely spaces and times, to be created where there are no spaces and times before. Now, is that required? I don't know. In our universe, there are laws of quantum mechanics. The big question that sort of led me to be a physicist in some sense is ultimately the question that Einstein asked, although he phrased it poorly. He said, did God have any choice in the creation of the universe? And by God, he certainly didn't mean God.
Sure.
What he meant is there just one consistent set of laws of physics? If we twiddled and changed one thing, would the whole edifice fall down? Is a physical reality only possible with one set of rules, or are many different sets of rules possible? That's a fascinating question for me as a physicist, and I don't know the answer. One possibility, which I discuss in my book, is that the laws themselves, including quantum mechanics, may be particular in our universe. There may be many universes, and the laws could vary in each universe. And the reason we happen to live in the universe in which we live is kind of a cosmic natural selection. It's not design, any more than bees are designed to be able to see the colors of flowers. You know, if they didn't, they wouldn't reproduce, and that's natural selection. We happen to be able to live in the universe in which we can live. It would be very surprising and worth writing a book or two if we found ourselves living in a universe in which we couldn't live. And so it could be that the laws are arbitrary and accidental. In fact, there are many well-founded arguments in physics now that suggest that's the case. I don't know the answer. But what I do know is that the characteristics of our universe, if we look out and try and measure them, are precisely the characteristics that a universe would have that was created from absolutely nothing by known laws of physics. And that I find remarkable and worth celebrating.
Thank you, Professor. We have another question.
Why would anyone consider the New Testament a reliable source of information about Jesus? They were Roman and Jewish writers at this time, but there is no contemporary verification of the events in the Bible, and even whether Jesus actually existed. Can you comment, please?
Sure, thank you. Why would you trust the New Testament? I think it's worth knowing that the New Testament is not one source. So when you say the New Testament, there are, if we're sticking to Jesus, there's the Gospel of Matthew, Gospel of Mark, Gospel of Luke, Gospel of John, and Paul. And then within Luke, we know Luke says that many have undertaken to write up a witness of the things that have happened, and I too will write an orderly account. So you have Luke, not alluding, directly talking about things written prior to him, and then you have within the Gospel of Matthew and the Gospel of Luke, the uncreatively titled M source and L source of unique material that neither of them, that they have unique to them. Then you have Q, which is unavailable to Mark. And so you've already got, half a dozen sources at least that are feeding into the New Testament, some of which for Christians fit awkwardly with each other. So a thing that's historically satisfying but for a Christian is a little bit disconcerting is that the gospel accounts do not appear to have been colluded prior to being disseminated. And so there are things, I think none of them are devastating, but they are awkward. And you think, who was there first and how did that work? And so I think which does bear witness to the fact that there's more than one person writing. So I think even within the New Testament you have multiple witnesses. And I think it's a high bar to say that people not interested in something ought to also write about something. So when I find out that that Lawrence has been passionate about science since high school, I don't think, well, I can't trust him. And I think similarly with historical work, Jesus was a Jewish Messiah, possible would-be Messiah, in a very provincial part of the Roman Empire. The fact that he gathered the attention of any non-Christian writer is interesting, as he did with Josephus and Shanice.
But, and by the way, and I encourage you to also question me. I know some people say I'm interrupting you, and I don't mean to.
No.
But I think it's important. So if I say something that you don't like, I really want to hear it. You honestly and beautifully, I thought, described some of the inconsistencies. But there's also many more Gospels. I mean, it was right. It was a choice in the Church of England case, or others, which ones would be chosen. So there's lots of stories. And I think you'd probably also agree that since the stories actually weren't written down for quite a while, 60, 70 years, they're probably based on oral traditions from family to family. And therefore, first of all, any inconsistencies are understandable, but any similarities are also understandable if it's oral tradition. So it's all understandable if people told their fathers or mothers, depending upon whether it's matriarchal or patriarchal, told their children a story, who then told their children a story, who then told their children a story, and then someone wrote it down.
I think that's the idea that the use of the word gospel for the other things we're talking about, the Gospel of Thomas and the Gospel of Peter and so on, and the Gospel of Mary, it's a pretty generous word for what those things are. Like when you read them, they're very unlike what you read in the New Testament. They're often just proverbial sayings alleged to have come from Jesus, or extraordinary, late 2nd century accounts. Like
but everything in those stories is that's again, when people say Jesus said, no one ever heard Jesus say anything. Again, it's someone alleging that someone else in general heard Jesus say something. So all of them are alleged statements of Jesus.
Sure.
Right?
That's fair. I just think that that's not it. It darkens more than it enlightens to call them all gospel. I mean, it's a useful shorthand, but it's not like it's in fact it's a complete myth to say that that the Council of Nicaea in 325 had before it 26 gospels and said, oh, there's a feminist one, we'll get rid of that, and there's one that would have allowed science to continue, we'll get rid of that, and here's the 4 that we want to control Christians. On the contrary, the New Testament is an emergent. It's an emergent form in sociology, which is a word you use in science as well.
Yeah, sure.
That the 4 Gospels, Matthew, Mark, Luke and John, and the letters of Paul were never disputed by any council. And when the councils did start to fuss about these things, they were talking about things that were already received as scripture, and the arguments were about the book of the Revelation, and the moment you read the book of Revelation, you think, yeah, there's an argument to be had here, what's going on, and Jude and a few other things where they had been received in one half of the empire but not the other, and the councils came together. But there is no council where they thought, we haven't got a Bible, we're Christians, Jews have got a Bible, we need a Bible, let's do this. It's an emergent form where the 4 Gospels and Paul are never disputed, and the other parts of the New Testament eventually find their way in or not around usage and alleged authorship and so on. We're
going to move on to another question.
My question's for Lawrence. In your speech, you kept saying that there is no evidence for the existence of God and his work in the world. However, many great scientific discoveries took decades, even centuries, to formulate. Was this because of lack of evidence, or was the evidence there all along and was misunderstood? Could you not also be misinterpreting the evidence which teaches us about God?
Well, I don't understand what you just said. I mean, I said there's no evidence, so I don't think I'm misinterpreting anything. You give me some evidence, and I'll let you know whether I'm misinterpreting it. But I think the point is, what's great about science is our views change. There are things I thought 30 years ago, and in books I've written, which were wrong, and that's wonderful. That's, as I said, that's called learning. We want to force our beliefs to conform to the evidence of reality, and when our understanding changes, the great thing about science, and for me, the really reason I love to talk about it, and its huge advantage over religion, is the fact that we can have an idea that's beautiful, that's elegant, that powers our whole being, and then find out it's wrong. We throw it up like yesterday's newspaper. That's an experience, as I've often said to university students and high school students. I hope every student who ever goes to school has that experience of having some idea that is a dear and essential part of their being proved to be wrong. Because that kind of open-mindedness, that kind of recognizing that you can be wrong and you need to change your mind is essential. And as Rory pointed out, if tonight the stars realigned and said in Aramaic or Hebrew, or according to some Americans in English, because God speaks English, that I saw I am here. I certainly reassess my statements.
Do you mind, can I say
Sure.
something? Yep. Just to say that I think, just as Christians ought not to say, because it's not true, that morality is unavailable to atheists, I think similarly, that experience is available to Christian people. That Christian people, you know, in science, delight in thinking, oh, I was wrong and that was right. And I think unless you're talking about a kind of a marginal group or whatever, I think the majority of Christian scientists are having that experience all the time and would, on reflection, I'm not saying they go into the lab praying that the Lord will reveal to them the nature of these things.
Well, what would stop you from believing?
What would stop me from believing? I think a knockdown one, although I realise it's kind of, I think Christianity is in principle falsifiable on the resurrection of Jesus.
How? Tell me how it would be falsifiable.
Well, I mean,
if you found the body?
Yeah, sure.
No, but I argue that's not falsification. If you got God, then God can, the body's just a body. God can resurrect Jesus and leave the old body there and create a new body, or an ethereal image of a body. So I suspect if a body was found that was Jesus, then people would say, you know what, that's okay, that's just his body. Jesus is God. So there's really no way to falsify it.
Well, so I think that's probably true. In a sociology of religion, a lot of people would find their way around that. But it is true to say that the first century Christians staked their claim on that and set themselves up as falsifiable on the claim of the resurrection of Jesus. So Paul says if Christ is not raised from the dead, we above all humans are to be most pitied.
But there's no way, that's a nice statement, it sounds good, but there's no way to disprove it when he said it, right?
Well, you could.
If what we said is wrong, then we should, you know, but there's no way. It's 60 years after the fact, and it's and no one can show it. So it's nice to say it. It sounds good. But
to be a little bit fair, that was Paul, you know, in the letter to the Corinthians, which is, you know, 20 years or whatever.
Professor,
20 years.
And where the guys are still, that's the one where he says the people are still alive.
What would make you believe?
I told you. Well, I mean, I would suspect that there's some evidence for something beyond any of the known laws of physics if I saw the stars realigning, for example. If in all of human history there was a single evidence of any miracle that ever happened, evidence which is falsifiable, then of course I'd have to take it seriously. Just like I've had many physics ideas, and when there's evidence that falsifies it, I change my ideas. That's why I do what I do.
We have a question from the floor.
My question's for Lawrence. In the beginning you stated that, I think I'm quoting you, that all scientists will not believe in God by reason of the scientific facts.
No, I didn't say that, but okay.
It came across that way, that
okay, then it was my fault.
Scientists believe, and yet that would not be fair, because I think there's many scientists who believe in God, PhD scientists believe in creative design. So
well, I mean, I think
on that.
Well, look, I mean, no sensible scientist believes in things like intelligent design. Let me make that clear. But there are scientists who are deeply faithful and deeply religious. Some of them are friends of mine. Francis Collins, for example, is a very good scientist and a very good friend of mine. There are Nobel Prize-winning scientists I know who are religious. So I would never make the statement that. But what does that mean? That scientists are people, and one of the things that makes us people is that we can believe in mutually inconsistent things at the same time. As I often say, most of us have to believe in 10 impossible things before breakfast just to get up in the morning. And so to say there are scientists who believe in God is like saying there are scientists who are Republican. Well, you know, it's no accounting for taste.
Paul, do we have another question?
A question for both speakers. Dr. Krauss, at the beginning of your talk you made the statement that science has made God irrelevant. I would like you to explain to us your logic in making that what I would call a jump. Mm-hmm. And I'd like Rory to explain to us why he doesn't make the same jump.
Which order do you want? You're the boss.
Professor, you can go first.
Okay. Well, what I mean by irrelevant is I've been a quote-unquote scientist for 35 years. I've never gone to a scientific meeting, not one, discussion of any aspect of the universe where God has come up. And what I mean is, in understanding the physical world, understanding everything and making predictions that govern our existence, including, by the way, predictions associated with evolutionary psychology, ethics, morality, there's no God, there's no hand of God, and there's no discussion. And so God is irrelevant to all of the areas of understanding the universe that I'm aware of. And that's what I mean by God is relevant. If you're asking historically, is God irrelevant? Absolutely not. I'd be a fool to say that. Obviously, as a historical force, the notion of religion is a vital part of the human experience, and it's universal. In most societies, they've all had beliefs in divinity of one sort or another, which, by the way, suggests at some level that we're hardwired to believe, which should make you interested and skeptical about that, since our beliefs have evolved. But so as a historical force, and for creating beautiful buildings and beautiful music and many other things, a belief in God is not irrelevant. God herself, however, is irrelevant when it comes to the workings of the world.
Rory?
Yeah, I think I would strangely agree that the nature of science, as I understand it, doesn't require the God hypothesis on a working week, that you don't, and in fact it is, by its very nature, the activity that you're involved in is saying, given certain things, given that things are constant, that our senses aren't intentionally misleading us, that we can think rationally and so on, and that we're conscious, given those things, let's go for it and follow the evidence wherever it goes. So as I've said before, I think you and Francis Collins or whatever will employ similar epistemological and methodological work as you do it. But I think that being Christian it doesn't require you to shoehorn God in, but it does give you, I think, a really powerful account of why we are able to think rationally and why we are able to investigate the universe and why there's that correlation between our senses and the data that comes to us and so on.
Do you think it's a more cogent account than, say, the history of evolutionary biology and evolutionary psychology in terms of the development of... Well, by the way, we don't understand cognition and consciousness.
Sure.
But in what sense do you think it explains why? I mean, I'm amazed. Because it says it?
Sure. I think you're going to hate this, but I think...
I expect I will.
Okay, you'll hate it. And Q groans. I think there is... I think biology is answering a different question. It's answering a how question. It's answering how did we come to the point where our senses are like this, and Christianity is answering a different question: is is there a purpose? Why has God given us this?
No, it's assuming an answer. It's not answering the question. It's saying there is a purpose. That's my problem with the why question. It's assuming the answer to the question before you even ask it. Yes, there's a purpose, and therefore there must be a why. But what if you ask the question, and that's what bothers me, because people like me are called strident, for just saying, maybe the why question doesn't mean anything. Maybe there is no purpose. That's a valid question, but you know, so Christianity isn't asking the question, it's assuming the answer.
Okay, I'm about to, this could be the dad dancing at 21st moment, but the why question is relevant in some parts of human life. So it doesn't make sense to say, if you say, why is Saturn there? That's an odd question.
Why is
Saturn there?
Well, you could. In fact, people thought of a divine explanation. As you probably know, Kepler thought that the planets had their relationships determined by mathematics, and God was a mathematician, and therefore he could understand why there were 6 planets by divine reason. Of course, he was wrong. But,
sure.
Yeah.
As with Aristotle.
Yeah.
As in, I don't think that mistake isn't an intrinsically Christian mistake.
Yeah, sure, absolutely.
In fact, I think the Greek dispensation to reason as opposed to empiricism retarded science in that way.
So which why questions are fundamental?
Well, I think, for example, in biology, you often ask, why is the nose there, or why is the ear there, or so on, or I realise that that's in some ways like metaphorical or whatever, but it's a useful question.
But when we say why, what we mean is how. What series of, and you've heard me say this before, I think essentially every why question is a how question. And as a parent, you know that intrinsically, because as a parent, the only answer to the series of why questions from your child is, because, go to bed.
Sure. How would you, is it circular? Like, if inhibit the why question from the start and say that's an inappropriate question to ask about human existence, human consciousness, and human experience, could we not at least ask the question and see if it proves to be fruitful?
Oh, sure. I didn't say it's an inappropriate question. The question is, you can ask, is there a purpose? You can ask that question. That's a valid question. And that's the kind of thing that science should look for. And as it looks for evidence of purpose, hasn't found any yet. Does that prove there's no purpose? No. But it's you know, we've looked everywhere and there's no evidence of purpose, and so we go on saying that the most likely assumption is there isn't. But it's a great question. It's a scientific one. I don't think it's a religious question. I think religious people assume, or in fact require the answer to that question.
I think the original question was relevance. Was God relevant? So Rory, what's your answer to that, relevance of God?
Yeah, absolutely. I think God is relevant to science, but not in the sense that the religious person, or the Christian person, has an advantage in the lab. I think at that meta level of a world of image-bearing people bearing the image of God, going out into the world and being empirical, I think that's where it lands.
I have another question.
Meaning we might cut to an audience member now.
Well, you've almost answered the question, but very simple question for you, Lawrence. Does life have a purpose for you? And it's not so much about the answer to that question, it's more about the question itself, I think. Yeah, well, look, it's a good question. I think the wonderful thing about living in a purposeless universe is it empowers me and energizes me, because it means in some sense the purpose of my existence is the purpose I make it. There's no cosmic Saddam Hussein who's pulling the strings and telling me if I do something wrong I won't just imprison me for a certain number of years, it'll be for all eternity. The actions I take, because I happen to be fortunate enough to be here with a brain at this random time, in this random galaxy, in the middle of a universe that is largely hostile, is remarkable, and we're celebrating. And the purpose in my existence I get from the purpose of my actions, in experiencing what I can experience as a human being, and enjoying the company of other human beings because I'm able to communicate because of the gift of the evolutionary gift of language. All of those things ennoble me. And I find, in fact, the notion that someone else determined, some puppeteer determined my purpose to be the exact opposite. It removes all human dignity. So somehow I'm offended when people argue that a purposeless universe makes no reason for me to do what I do. It gives me more reason to do what I do.
Hi. My question is for Lawrence, but Rory might want to comment as well. Just that, Lawrence, you said that you felt the Bible was unscientific, but how do you explain that the Jewish rituals and culture involved much hand-washing and separation from the dead and diseased people, and the science of this was only discovered in the 1800s?
Well, look, first of all, I'm not alone, I think, in saying the Bible isn't a scientific document. I think I probably have St. Augustine, Moses, Maimonides, pretty well every major theologian agreeing with me. Is that correct?
Sure.
Okay. But the more important than that, I think the Bible is a handbook, especially the Old Testament, a handbook written by people to, in some sense, establish rules for existence. Sometimes those rules justified imperialistic behavior. It's okay to kill people because you want their land. Sometimes, however, they're rules that are useful. And at the time, these rules, you've got a society living, and it was the handbook, and say, okay, these rules actually happen to help. But what amazes me is that we still live by those rules, even though those things don't exist anymore. My background is Jewish, and my brother happens to be kosher. And why you won't have milk with meat? Well, maybe back then, that people have argued, well, there was bacteria in meat, and milk would, and there were all sorts of reasons. But now we know better. So there's no rational reason to obey that prescription that was done by people who were attempting to live their lives in a time of ignorance. Because we're not ignorant anymore. And I guess that's my point. Let's overcome the ignorance on which the Bible is based.
Just to kind of confirm what I was affirming, I think one of the things about the Bible is to work out what is the purpose of this book. What does it purport to do? And I think I'm sorry to overuse the word empirical, but I can't think, is it inductive? That you want to have an approach to the Bible where you don't have an a priori assessment of what it is claiming to do. And the Bible, is the Bible claiming to do all your science for you so that there's no lab work left to do? Is it claiming to do all your culture for you so there's no culture left to build? Is it claiming to do all your thinking for you? No, I think that the Bible claims to tell the story that culminates in the person of Jesus Christ, his death and resurrection, and is given by God to instruct the people of God to live that life. And I think, and so I think to impose on it alien categories of tell me how to do that and tell me how to, which I think is what Augustine and Aquinas and so on are doing. I don't think they're being evasive, saying, "Oh, this is
no,
this
they're
is
not being evasive.
I think they're being inductive.
But they have to say that, don't you agree? I mean, I would disagree with something else you said. You made it seem as if it's okay that scientists. Well, of course it's okay that scientists are people of faith, but to do so, they have the Bible is not only not a scientific document, it's scientifically inaccurate. I mean, the creation, is ridiculous. And so you have to, if you're going to accept it as a document, you can't help but say it's not a scientific document, because if you do, you're ridiculous, because it's wrong. So you have to say, well, it's not a scientific document because all of the science in it is wrong. Well, that's true. I mean, it is, right?
Say it again.
The science is wrong. This order of creation in Genesis, you have to say it's allegorical and blah, 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 but it's not science. Because if you accept it, by the way, as you know, someone from Australia who's created the creation ministry in the United States and has the Young Earth Creation Museum, argues, and I think I can respect him for this, he said, the minute you show some aspects of the scripture are wrong, then why believe any of it? I agree with him there.
Sure.
Yeah.
Yeah.
This is a question for Rory. The vast majority of scientists support both the Big Bang Theory and the theory of evolution. If you disagree, do you think somehow almost all of science has it wrong, or is it some sort of massive conspiracy?
No, well, I wouldn't in principle disagree with either of those. I think they're both features of science to which we are getting better and better knowledge of, and so I think the advances in our understanding of biology and the advances in our understanding of cosmology, I welcome unreservedly as areas that we're growing in our knowledge of. So, yeah.
Yeah, but let me, I mean, the question is phrased inappropriately. The theory of evolution is not a theory. Evolution is a fact. So there are no scientists or practicing scientists who don't accept the fact that that speciation occurs and natural selection occurs and all of those things, because the evidence, it's not as if scientists get together and say, let's believe this. In fact, whatever scientist wants to do, everyone who's a scientist wants to go out and the next day show their colleagues are wrong, because that's the way you get to be more well known and you get to learn things. And so the theory of evolution is a misuse of the term theory, just like saying Newton's theory of universal gravitation is just a theory. And if I drop a ball tomorrow, it'll fall up. Okay, theory and science means something very different than it does in the colloquial terms. And therefore, the claiming that most scientists believe is itself an incorrect statement. Belief is not a part of science. The evidence, the theory makes predictions, it only rises to the point of being a theory when its predictions over and over and over again are satisfied by the results of experiments. Then something goes from a hypothesis to a theory. So theory is the highest level, if you wish, of scientific development. And evolution, which is certainly one of the best tested scientific theories known for 150 years, has predicted many things which could have been falsified, but in fact haven't. It's gotten stronger because of that. And so to say most scientists feel that is like say, it's not a democracy. It's, people tend to think, it's he said, she said. In science, the great thing about science is sometimes, usually, one person is just wrong. And the people who don't think evolution happened have no basis in evidence. Now, that doesn't mean there aren't people with PhDs who say that, but there are people with PhDs who say the Earth is flat. I can find you some.
Does that answer your question? Yes?
I think, and I agree with that. That's been a great thing in reading and thinking about this occasion. I think that's true. I can't remember who it was who said that, if someone found a rabbit in the Precambrian fossil deposit, you'd be straight to nature to say, awesome, I found this, this is my career and my so on. May I also say that that's also true in its own way of biblical studies, that the reason that the Gospel of Thomas and the Gospel of Peter are known to you and the Gospel of Judas is because New Testament studies are a competitive field where people make their PhDs of saying that the tradition is incorrect and I've found something. And so I think I wanted to just in as much as some Christians give the impression, not many I think, but some Christians give the impression that scientists are getting together and saying, let's hide this evidence and we found this and we're going to hide it away because we've got some vested interest in it being X and not Y. I think the field of New Testament studies is similarly a field rich with heretics. And it's for the good of it because it just means that these things are coming into peer-reviewed journals and the Gospel of Thomas is being presented and the Gospel of Judas is being presented and we're working out how these things fit with our picture of early Christianity. And certainly on early Christianity, we are far better informed than we were 50 years ago. We know so much more about First Temple Judaism, about the nature of the Jewish hope, about the Dead Sea Scrolls and the various Jewish sects, and I think the vast majority of Christian scholars welcome that and we have been immeasurably enriched by the things that we've learned recently.
Absolutely, historical scholarship is real study. It's historical scholarship. It's not necessarily, it's not theology per se. And any time we can, it's really evidential. It's science. It's empirical study based on evidence and rational thinking. So that's my definition of science, and that's to be welcome. The question, of course, is could any of that evidentiary work? The worry is that it's still based on the presumption that there's something divine about the Bible, and that's a presumption, and that's fine that people have it, and if it motivates their study, fine. But I don't see any way it's going to change any minds.
Now, sorry.
Yep. We'll leave that there. We'll go to the question on the floor.
My question is for Rory. How best would you protect our children from illogical thought and reason and the growth of anti-science beliefs in the right-wing media today? That's good.
I think you do it the way. I think you do it by participating. I think one of the great things about a modern Western democracy like ours is that I think you would have to actively shield your kids from that. Like I think if you participate as an active, happy member of a democracy like Australia and so on. You would have to actively shield your kids from science and critical thinking and so on, and I think you would have to address the people whoever they are who are making that decision to withdraw their children from being exposed to those things.
Yeah. Would you agree? I think we'd agree on this. Let me throw something in. I mean, ultimately the way is. I'm an educator, and there's an old saying that if the only tool you have is a hammer, everything looks like a nail. But education, what you're really talking about is ignorance. Ignorance breeds fear, and the way to overcome that is education.
Sure, absolutely. And I think there's no future for Christianity. There's no future for a Christianity that is sectarian and cult-like. I think if our story about the world is true and fulfilling and for human flourishing, then we need to put it out there, and tonight is a case in point. And I think, I think I haven't come to persuade you to become a Christian, although I would very much welcome that. And I assume you didn't have high ambitions for me, changing my mind. But I think the thing is that here we are. There's 350 people here who get to hear this conversation and pass judgment on it. And I think this kind of thing is so healthy. And I think a Christian faith that is so fragile that it can't expose itself to this kind of thing or to secular and state schooling and so on is probably not worth preserving.
I applaud that. But But there's a subtle subtext, which I still have to, I mean, I'd love to agree 100%, but the subtle subtext is that somehow I'm here to convert people, that science is a belief system. Yep. No. And I think that's a real fundamental difference. Science isn't a belief system. It's a process. It's a process to how to understand truth, nonsense from sense, how to make accurate predictions, how to act rationally. And so my goal is to encourage that, but there's no beliefs or non-beliefs I'm trying to convert people to, and it's therefore very different, I think, than the goal of your wanting me to be, or anyone else to be a Christian, which is you want me to have a belief system, and I don't care about anyone's belief system. I just want people to be able to assess the world rationally and act sensibly.
Sure.
Yeah.
My question's for Lawrence. Do you think there are mysteries or phenomena in the natural which are beyond our understanding?
I wouldn't be a scientist if I didn't think there were, because it wouldn't be nothing left to do. There's much more we don't understand about the universe than we do understand, which makes it so exciting. Not understanding is the greatest gift we have, because it means there's more to learn. I often say, as a theoretical physicist, the two favorite states to be in are wrong and confused, and I'm usually both. And so I think, and Rory, I know would agree with this, what you're subtly suggesting is this God of the gaps argument. In fact, when I was on Q&A with the last time with Fred and Hiles, okay, but also with good old Gay Jean, one of the things I told him later that I vastly disagreed with is he said there's some things that are not understandable. We don't know what's not understandable. It's an incredibly arrogant thing to suggest that some things are not understandable. There are many things that are not understood, but that's vastly different than saying, I know that I'll never understand them. And our goal is to just keep trying. Maybe we'll never do it, but we can't know for certain.
Well said. And we do have another question. I think we've got another couple of questions, I think, and then we'll have to wrap up.
Thanks. I have a question for Rory. Even if it is the case that belief in a God can't be shown to be reasonable or proven, do you think that it might be pragmatically worthwhile to believe in a God that as a healthy form of self-deception?
Wow.
That's certainly not the way, it's not the way the Christian faith pitches itself. So I think you could, I guess you could perhaps mount, it would be interesting to ask you that, if you could get the right kind of control experiments and everyone was happy and there were double-blind tests and all the rest of it, and you could work out that belief in God in something in the ballpark of what I was describing was better rather than worse, I think you still wouldn't want that, would you?
Well, no, want is not that's not an operational thing. Would I like people to be happy? Am I happy that for some people a belief in God consoles them? Of course I am in times of incredible grief. Would I go up to someone who's just lost a loved one and say, you know what, they're not going to heaven? Of course not.
Sure.
Of course not. I want, I'm a human being who cares about other human beings, just like you are. And so we all deceive ourselves, and I do think religion is a form of self-deception. If I thought it was a healthy form of self-deception, I would be less concerned. I think it's an unhealthy form of self-deception.
Yeah, and I think that has been a feature of the modern. I don't know if you like this term, but kind of the modern resurgence of atheism in the last 10 or 15 years, that it has mounted that case, which is relatively, I mean, what was mounted sometimes in the 19th century. Most 19th century atheists were somewhat mournful. They were like, it's a shame we can't believe this anymore because it's kind of gorgeous. And I guess the anti-theist label, which I think you wear.
Well, for fun, I say I'm an anti, because Christopher said he was an anti-theist, but I don't think I say that anymore. It's for fun to say. It is true that, the idea that someone's pulling all the strings, I personally find repugnant. But if it were the case, then I'd accept it. I don't label myself. In fact, actually, I'm always offended, and the one thing I've been offended about in all of these things is that I'm labeled as atheist Lawrence Krauss. I'm not an ist. I'm not an ism. If you were going to label me at all, it'd be with an ist, it's a scientist. But I don't label myself as an atheist. Sure. It's not. I don't label myself as an A leprechaunist or an A St. Nicholasist or whatever. I don't define myself by things I don't. Except I try not to define myself, nor do I try to define other people. You know, it is true that your Christianity is one characteristic of a human being, but do I do it to label you and say, well, put you in a box? Well, I'm old enough, I hope, to think that I don't do that anymore.
Sure.
Yeah.
I'm pretty sure that's all the questions from the floor, but I'm just going to close by putting this question to you. If or when you find yourself in the depths of despair, when other people might turn to God or, to pray or to seek guidance, what do you do?
Well, I turn to my loved ones, the people who care about me, for support and sympathy, and they have the great virtue of being real. And I've often, maybe I'll now describe, that was a beautiful way to end, but I can't resist. You know, the only time, I mean, I'm a human being, so, you know, I want to believe, I recognize that, and I have to be skeptical of myself. And I've often found that sometimes when I was growing up, the only time I was tempted to believe in a divinity was when something bad happened to me, because I figured I deserved it.
Rory, I'm going to let you have the last say. What do you do in the depths of despair?
Predictably, I pray and ask God to be with me and to provide the comfort that he promises. Yeah.
On that note, can you please thank our speakers, Pastor Rory Shiner and Professor Lawrence Krauss.